Hi, I'm Jaren, and I'm off on an adventure to learn more about Middle Tennessee history. I want to know what the people who lived in our communities experienced in the past. Today, I'm headed out to talk to some friends about the different resources that are available to help us learn more about the history of our communities. Hey everybody! So I thought the best place to start our journey of learning about local history was to just go right downtown and see what we could find. When I was there, I ran into my friend Blake, and I thought he'd be a great person to talk to get us started. Hey Blake.
Hi Jaren.
How are you?
Doing good.
So Blake, you moved here to Middle Tennessee relatively recently,
That's right.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up in western Arkansas in Fort Smith and Van Buren.
Okay. So what have you done in the time that you've been here to learn about Middle Tennessee history?
Well, I consider myself a historian, so it's kind of my job to learn about the local history. So there's lots of resources that you've got people who already know about the local history. So we have a county historian in Williamson County, Rick Warwick, who is a wealth of information. So I just love to sit down and ask him questions. But from there, we have libraries and archives where there's lots of local history books. There's lots of people who've come before us who've written things down. So that's what I do.
Okay. Why do you think local history is important?
I mean, it's where we live and what came before us, but it connects us to our community and connects us to each other. Of course, our local history is embedded in a national story too, so it connects it to the national story as well.
Yeah. One thing that I really appreciate about historic preservation is just the fact that it's so much easier to learn what happened in a place when that place is still there. You can learn more from even just standing outside a historic home than from just looking at a picture of it, I think.
Yeah.
So I think
there's something about being in a place and thinking about what had happened there before. I think that's an experience that you can't just recreate in a museum or in a classroom.
Another thing that I have found really interesting is how many historical markers there are around town. I mean, even if maybe the buildings aren't there, I've noticed that on my drive, say from home to downtown or from Columbia up to Spring Hill, or especially from Columbia up to Franklin, there are so many historical markers. And I think that a lot of us just kind of pass those every single day and don't give them a lot of thought. But that is a really great resource for us to start learning about local history. All right. We just talked about how much we can learn about our local communities if we just open our eyes and pay attention to what's around us. But now we're here at the Maury County Archives to see how we can dig a little bit deeper into that information. Let's go. All right, so we are here with Tom Price, who's the director of the Maury County Archives. Tom, first of all, can you tell us what is an archive?
In archives, many counties in the state of Tennessee have archives. They're the place where all of the records of the county come and reside. So we have a really big job. When you work in an archives, you're in charge of all of those records. So Maury County is only one, I think, of 3 counties in the entire state of Tennessee that has all of its records from the very beginning, in our case 1807, all the way up until the present. That represents millions of records. So if you think about your lifetime, how many documents are generated to track your life? From the day you're born, you have a birth certificate, you have a marriage certificate, you have a driver's license. These records track your life, and those records are kept, and eventually they come to an archives. So if a person lived in Maury County from 1807 until now, we probably have some records related to them. So we're talking about millions of records that we're in charge of here. So that's what an archives does. We're a place where the records are housed. I like to think of an archives as the county's memory. This is where you can come and learn about the history of the place where you live.
Okay. So if I were a local student and I had a question about something about local history, or maybe I had a question about my family, could I just come in here?
Absolutely. We're open to the public. All of the records that we provide are public record, so you can come in and have a look. So the biggest demographic for us, the largest number of people that come to the archives are here to study their family history, to do genealogy is what that's called, which is the, I think, second most popular hobby in the world after gardening. So lots of people are very interested in learning about their family history and where they come from. So that's the largest number of people that come here. If you can trace your family to Murray County, we probably have records on them. So lots of people from all over the country come here to learn about their family history. That's the biggest one. Our second biggest demographic is kind of a new one. So many people are moving into this area from out of state and buying property. They want to know the history of the property. So every day we have people who are calling us and emailing us and coming in to find out what the history of their house is or what the history of their property is. So that's another big thing that we do here.
Okay. So thinking about the people who come in from out of state and want to learn more about their family, what's the farthest someone's come?
Oh gosh, they come from all over the country. They come from outside the country even. We've had people that can trace their roots from England and Scotland. So we have people that have come across the Atlantic Ocean to learn about their history, the history of their family, because their family came from England, crossed the ocean. Usually for people in Murray County, they can trace their family to North Carolina and Virginia and South Carolina. They would live there for a generation or several generations, and then they'd start moving west as the United States opened up westward. So too did the people in their family. So, and a lot of those people from North Carolina came to Murray County and came here and settled here. So we'll have people from every state in the Union and then other countries as well.
That's so cool.
Murray County is very much a crossroads. I like to think of it as that. Murray County was settled in 1807 when this was very much the western frontier of the United States. So people are moving here. They're prospering. This is some of the finest growing land. So agriculture really blossomed here. Murray County was one of the wealthiest, I think the wealthiest county in the state of Tennessee prior to the Civil War because of agriculture, because of slave economy too. And so there's a lot of money here made, and then after a generation or two they continued to move westward. So people from here moved on to Arkansas, they moved into Mississippi, they moved into Texas. So many people from Murray County moved to Texas, they actually used a notation in their county records, GTT, for gone to Texas. So many people were moving there. So you'll often hear that Tennessee is the mother of Texas because so many people from this area moved on to Texas. So you can follow those lines. You can follow those migration routes in a place like an archives because we have the records that tell the stories.
That's so great. Well, I'm excited to learn more about that. As we shoot more episodes, we do more of this season, I think that'll give us some really interesting things to talk about. But I was curious if you could show us some cool stuff that you have here at the archive.
We have lots. So if you think about the records that we have, so we're in charge of gathering the records. We're in charge of conserving the records as well, which is a big thing. So these documents are over 200 years old, a lot of them. So it takes a lot of work to keep these papers in order. So a lot of these records were kept in the various courthouses that Murray County has had. We've had 3 courthouses on the same location. They were in the basement. Eventually they came here when the archives opened in 2001. And if you think about the conditions that those records were in, the earliest courthouse was heated with a fireplace, so wood smoke everywhere, right? And then as technologies changed, you would have coal burning stoves. So everything is covered in smoke dust and coal dust, and they come to us. And we have to unfold these papers very carefully, we have to clean them very carefully, we flatten them, and then we have to read them. And then after we read them, we put them in order and make them available to the public. So every document that we have, millions of them, are handled 4 or 5 times before they wind up in a folder like this. So there's a lot of work that goes into that side of it as well. But I did bring out a couple of documents that'll give you an idea of some of the things we have. So it's an interesting one, 1875, where Murray County was kind of thriving by 1875. It had a thriving downtown business community, and this gentleman, Mr. Folk, went downtown and spent some money in a store. And he was given some change back, and he went to another store and spent some money there, and everything seemed fine until the shopkeeper showed up a couple of days later and said that the money that you gave me was counterfeit. And he, of course, denied that it was a counterfeit bill that he gave him, and so it went to court. He was sued for it. And so we have the court case that speaks to this story, this one single story. What's really interesting with this is sometimes the evidence is still around, and we have the actual counterfeit bill, the $5 bill, that was evidence in the case. What's amazing about this is when you look at this bill, it's a very good bill. How would you possibly know, looking at the detail of this, that it's counterfeit? Well, if you do a little research, you'll find that after the Civil War, they estimate up to 50% of the currency in America in circulation was counterfeit. But they were very good counterfeiters at the time. So I contacted an expert on 19th century money, and he looked at it, and he was able to determine that it was counterfeit. And I asked, well, how would a person in 1875, how would a shopkeeper in downtown Columbia know that? And he said they issued books. Banks at that point in time could issue their own currency. And so there was a lot of different kinds of currency circulating around the country at the time, but they issued these books. And you would look inside every day, and as you looked through your currency, the various currency you had, and make sure that everything matched up, that the dates and the signatures and the bank name all was in order. Now in this case, this is the United States bank note for Traders National Bank in Chicago. Well, there was a Traders National Bank in Chicago, but they weren't printing money at the time that this bill is numbered. So that's how they were able to figure that out. And so this went through the court case, and we have all of the court records that go along with it. Some court cases are very thick with hundreds of documents. Other court cases that we have are very thin and don't have a whole lot of information. But again, they all have a story to tell. Manuscripts. Now, a manuscript is going to be a personal letter that's written, a journal, a diary. We always encourage kids especially to write diaries, write their thoughts down on paper and keep them. And it kind of freaks them out a little bit because I say someday they'll wind up in an archives, which, what do you write in a diary? Mostly things that you don't want everybody to know. But 100 years from now or 200 years from now, it's a glimpse into what was important to a kid, 200 years ago.
So are we advising people to be careful what they write in their diaries?
No, we want all of the information. We want
write it all down.
We want everything that's important to them in their lives, because it really speaks to a time period. It gives a glimpse into what a person, who's 11 or 12 years old, what's important to them in 2020. And we have journals from kids, and adults who wrote in 1820, and we can see sort of those differences and what's important and what changes in life. Super important, really important to have all of those
things. Can I interrupt you before we go on, though? So speaking about 2020 specifically, this is a weird year, to say the least. Should we be encouraging adults, kids, everybody to write down what they're experiencing, and is that something they could give to you? We
actually put a call out earlier in the year, and we've done it a couple of times since, asking people to write down what it was like to live in this pandemic. Super important. This is a historic year, there's no doubt. You called it weird and odd, and it feels like that to us, but it's an important one. If you think in 1918, when the Spanish flu was going around and so many people were dying from that illness, a lot of people kept journals, and it's sort of a snapshot. But what does that do for us in 2020? It helps us understand how did they get through it, and so we can learn from those documents. So really important. So absolutely, I would encourage people to keep a pandemic journal just for the time that this is going on. How did it impact you? Did you have to leave school? Your school closed because of this pandemic. How did education change? Was it better for you? Did you like it that you didn't have to go to school, or maybe you hated it? And you don't get to see your friends. What's going on with that? It's super important to keep a journal, especially now in 2020. This is a journal, actually, that I brought out. This was written by not a kid, but by an adult. His name was Reverend Mack. He was a Presbyterian minister, but he was also a world traveler. And he decided during his travels through Europe, notes of his voyage and tour in Europe in the summer of 1869. So he bought a book. He lived here in Columbia, but he bought a book, a journal book, and he kept really beautifully the story of his travels through Europe just after the Civil War. What I love about this particular journal, his handwriting is beautiful, is amazing. That's another issue that we have now with students who want to volunteer at the archives. A lot of them don't know how to read cursive. Everybody in the 19th century wrote in cursive, so that's a good skill to know how to a good skill to have, so you can read these documents. But he pasted inside lithographic images or engraved images of places that he visited. So he writes about them, and then he illustrated them throughout the book as well. Really neat. This is a beautiful book, but a wonderful document to talk about, what it was like for him to travel through Europe. What did Europe look like to an American in 1869? Pretty neat.
Yeah.
So we collect things like that as well. Manuscript collections, we call them. Journals and diaries and letters written by people who lived in Murray County.
Okay.
Maybe 200 years ago.
Now, along with being the director of the archives here, you also do a weekly show where you interview local people. Can you tell us about that? What's the name of it?
Yeah,
Where
it's a
can we
radio
watch
show
it?
called History's Hook, which we started last year. It's a weekly hour-long show that connects local history to national and world history. It's sort of making those connections again. And Edmund Kelly is a great example that I've already talked about, where you take a little local story and figure out how it connects to the much bigger picture either nationally or even globally. And it's been a lot of fun to do that. So I take local people or local stories and then expand and try to figure out how it connects to the bigger history. So it's called History's Hook, a weekly show on WKOM, WKRM radio.
Okay. And is there like a back catalog that we can access?
They're working on the website now to make them all available. We have so far about 30 episodes.
Okay.
So people will be able to listen to them online.
Okay.
A lot of fun.
Yeah. Sounds great. All right. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, I'm up in Nashville at the Tennessee State Museum to talk to another friend of mine about how museums can help us learn about our communities. Come on. All right, I'm here with my friend Morgan, who's the Family Programs Coordinator at the Tennessee State Museum in Nashville. Morgan, can you tell us a little bit about what a museum is?
Sure. So a museum is a place that holds things like artifacts. So that could be, like for us, we have a Conestoga wagon, but it could be a piece of art. It could be science. It can be all kinds of really cool things. A museum is a place where you come to learn.
So we earlier were at the Murray County Archives, speaking with Tom Price, the director there, and it seems like maybe a big difference between an archive and a museum might be that archives tend to have more paper-based documents, and a museum has more objects.
Right. So that is a good observation. Usually archives have things like pictures and letters and newspapers, and museums have those too, but we also have like big artifacts. So we have everything from letters and diaries to a car and a wagon. So usually in a museum we have more bigger things like three-dimensional objects.
Yes.
But we do have paper things too.
Well, that's great because there's a lot that you can learn about history from the objects that people made and used.
Yes.
So what is your favorite artifact here at the museum?
Ooh, I have two favorite artifacts. I couldn't decide which one to pick. But one of my favorite artifacts is actually a moccasin that we have in our First People exhibit. And the reason it's so cool is that it really shouldn't be here. It, over time, should have just disappeared because it's made of grass. But because the person using it kind of just discarded it on a rock shelf in a cave, it was protected for over 1,000 years. So that in itself is just really cool because not many people have that type of artifact. And my other favorite artifact is our Dolly Parton butterfly suit because I love Dolly Parton. She's my favorite Tennessean, so if she's watching this, hey Dolly. But that's my favorite, those are my two favorite artifacts.
We should be so lucky as to have Dolly Parton watching our little show.
Come on guys, we can do it.
That would be incredible. So do you have some tips for us for visiting a museum and having the best experience?
Yes, I was actually thinking about this question last night. So a lot of times when you go to a museum, it can be kind of overwhelming because there's lots of stuff here. So one of the things I like to do before I go to a museum is sometimes I'll look at the website and kind of see what they have. So, you know, if you really like, say, the 1920s, if you come here, we could, I could tell you, okay, I know what gallery to go to for that. So kind of knowing what you're doing. But another thing I really like to do is I like to take pictures of my favorite artifacts. So you do have to ask. So here at the State Museum, we can take pictures, just no flash. So I take pictures of the artifacts I really like, or sometimes I carry a little notebook with me and I can kind of write down the artifacts I like. And another big one is, I don't know about you guys, but I get hungry. So a lot of times museums, you can't eat or drink anything, but they'll let you bring a snack or a water bottle with you as long as you don't drink or eat in the gallery. So then it's really nice after I get done, I'll go find a bench, or maybe I'll sit in the grass outside and I can have a little snack, because looking at artifacts can make you pretty hungry.
All right, those are really great tips. Let me ask you something. What is your favorite museum you've ever been to?
That's a hard one. I should explain. My dad's a high school history teacher, so when I was growing up, my family went to museums all the time. That was basically our summer vacation. Was we picked a place and we went to as many museums as possible. But I think probably my favorite one is actually not in the United States. It's in Dublin, Ireland. It's called the Dublina, and it's the Viking Museum.
Ooh.
And I liked it because you got to touch things. So you could touch replicas of artifacts, and there was just fun things to do. And so it really made that history come to life because you could really immerse yourself in it.
Yeah.
So that was a really fun one. And of course, I like our museum here too.
Of course. I should have said, what's your favorite museum that is not the Tennessee State Museum? You know, one thing that I really like about the Tennessee State Museum, and of course, there are a lot of smaller museums around Tennessee, especially around Middle Tennessee. There's lots of museums, lots of historic sites. And the nice thing about the Tennessee State Museum is that you can go visit the museums and the historic sites in your community to learn more about your community's story. And then you can come to some place like the State Museum that's going to help you understand your community's story in the context of Tennessee's history.
Yes. That's one of the cool things that I really like about museums, especially like small town museums. So, you know, in Columbia, we have like the Polk Home, which is really cool because you can learn all about President Polk. And then you can come here to the State Museum and we have a few more things. And so it's really kind of cool because you can learn about his life where he did live and then his life in the bigger picture of Tennessee. But one of the things that I truly love about museums is, of course, you're going to have those big names. So we have, you know, President Polk, Andrew Jackson, Andrew Johnson, because they were the three presidents from Tennessee. But then you learn about other people, those people that might not be so famous. And that's really cool, too, because, you know, their stories are also important. So like Cornelia Fort and Mr. Bledsoe, those are people that we might not know about, but you learn about them at a museum, which is really neat.
Yeah. Now, the museum, Tennessee State Museum, is open, but I know that you guys have been working really hard on digital programs, resources that people can access online. Where can we find those resources?
That's a great question. So if you go to the Tennessee State Museum website, so just Google Tennessee State Museum and it'll pop up our website. We have all kinds of resources on the museum site. Actually, we just opened our brand new exhibit called Ratified. It's about the passing of the 19th Amendment and the women's right to vote. And what's really cool is they were able to come up with this activity where you get a picture, you get a map of Tennessee, and you can click on each county and kind of learn a little bit about how suffrage played out in those counties. And then for families with kids, we know school's starting back up. Also on the website, we have a dedicated page just for kids, and it has things like curator blogs and puzzles and story time. So all kinds of really fun things that the whole family can enjoy on the website.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today about museums. I really hope that everybody watching this will make a point to safely visit museums in their community and then come here to the State Museum to see how it all fits together in the larger story of Tennessee's history.
I'm so glad we got to hang out today, Jaren.
Yes, it was really good to see you.
Thanks, guys. We hope to see you soon at the Tennessee State Museum. Bye.
So I'm back home thinking about everything that I've learned in my trips to Columbia and Nashville. I feel like I have a much better idea of how to get started learning about local history. So I hope you'll join me over the next few months as we investigate the documents, the artifacts, the streets, and even the backyards of Middle Tennessee to learn more about our community's history.